Greetings, passengers. This is your captain speaking. We will be flying directly over a tale of two bills this evening as the runway is closed due to poor conditions. We will be diverting to a tale of a third bill. We appreciate your patience and thank you for choosing to fly with us.
Bill woke up from a fitful and less than completely restful night's sleep. He could feel the creak in his bones as he rolled and swung his legs so that his feet dangled over the side of his bed. The bed was rather tall, and even though he was a fully grown adult man of average height, when he sat on the edge of his bed with his feet dangling, they were just short of reaching to the floor. As he reached his arms out broadly to stretch, hearing the little pops and cracks in his various joints as he began to feel a little more awake, shaking his arms and then pushing himself up and kind of half jumping so that he was now standing next to his bed. He began to move about in a fidgety manner. In his mind, he thought it was a means of just to get the blood running. But in truth, if you were to observe it, you'd say he just looked like a pretty eccentric, odd, and fidgety nervous man. He strolled over to the window and pulled the curtains aside, looking out, to find a morning that was heavily overcast, very gray. He could feel the chill in the air. He quite liked the chill, and the gray suited him fine, as he sunburned easily and so was not a fan of hot and bright weather. He made his way to his kitchen, filling his kettle with water so that he could have his morning cup of instant coffee. He did enjoy the taste of coffee, but found himself far too lazy to actually use the very expensive cappuccino machine that was on his kitchen counter. As he was setting the kettle to heat, waiting for it to boil, his telephone rang. As he answered it, there was the all too familiar tone of that robotic, somewhat nasally voice. Was it supposed to be a female voice, he thought? It certainly wasn't a low enough register that he should be interpreting it to be a man's voice, but it didn't quite catch the female timbre. It was explaining to him that his current set of prescriptions, mostly allergy meds, were ready for him to pick up from the drugstore. He listened patiently to the information and was informed that if he had no questions, he could simply hang up. But as was his habit, he always said, "No thanks, I have no questions, have a nice day, goodbye." There were several occasions when friends of his were present, and they would overhear him giving this sort of goodbye message to a robot call. They, of course, only knew it was a robot call because after the call was over, he would have informed them that it was. And they would always say something to the effect of, if it was a robot call, then why in the world would you bother giving it any kind of niceties or courtesy? And he would always smile at them and say, it's just a habit I've developed. It's better to keep the habit up than it is to lose the habit and risk insulting a person, no matter who they might be. And he said, what was the harm in trying to not offend the robot caller? To which his friends would laugh and always think to themselves, what a fucking screwball that guy is. But his friends all thought he was friendly enough, nice enough, and they did enjoy his company and friendship. He continued on with his morning, pouring the water into a cup and adding probably double the amount of recommended dried coffee into the hot water, stirring it up in his cup, hearing the clink of the metal spoon against the ceramic cup, and listening as the pitch suddenly changed as the coffee dissolved into the water. He added sugar, again, probably twice what anybody else would add, and poured in a large dollop of cream, not milk. Cream. He went to his kitchen table, sat down, preparing to enjoy his coffee when he realized, crap, the newspaper. This was something he did most mornings. Go to sit at the table and realize, oh crap, I forgot the paper. So he got himself up, went to the front door, opening it, pushing the screen door open, having to shoo the cat away on the porch that was always attempting to sneak into his house. This annoyed him because it wasn't his cat. He had made the mistake of being friendly to it once, and now it wouldn't leave him alone. He bent over, retrieved the paper, and let the screen door close, shutting the front door, made his way back to the table. Sitting down, pulling the rubber band away from the paper and slowly spreading it out to just sort of look at the front page and the headlines and looking down at what stories were below the fold. It was an odd behavior to a certain degree because he never read the news section of the paper. He would pull out the sports section. He was an avid spectator of just about all sports. The unfortunate thing was that he wasn't athletic himself and never really learned to understand the rules of very many games. He just enjoyed watching them. He would also pull out the section of paper that usually had things like current events and the society pages. But the pages of interest to him in that section were the funny pages and the daily puzzles, a word jumble, the crossword, and a Sudoku. All three of which he dove into and eagerly completed, not being very good at any of the three, but enjoying attempting them anyway. Once he is finished with his morning coffee and paper, he would look at the clock on the wall, realizing that he was running behind, make his way, take a shower, put on his clothes, and leave the house for work. He had a simple and boring job at an insurance company, mostly seeing that forms and requests and inquiries and the like were complete and handled by all the appropriate personnel. He didn't really handle much of these things on his own, you see, because he was a bottom-rung manager. He often thought to himself that if the people below him were any good at their jobs, and if the people above him were any good at their jobs, his job would simply not exist. Most days, this one to be included, time more or less just sort of slipped by, and before he knew it, it was lunchtime. The blessing and benefit to this was he never really suffered much while he was at work. As a result, he was able to attend to his job without missing or even taking sick days, because he didn't mind being there, really. Not that he enjoyed it or looked forward to it, but by the time lunchtime did come around, he would think to himself, man, that wasn't so bad. Now let's go to lunch. He went downstairs, making his way out to the street, trying to figure out where he would have his lunch today. This was a typical occurrence for him, where he wasted a good portion of his lunch hour just trying to think of a place to go to lunch. And by the time he had decided, he had wasted so much time that he had little time to actually enjoy the lunch that he had decided to buy. This day he was thinking to himself that, it's a shame. I always feel like lunchtime was actually a bit unpleasant because I always manage to waste too much time and end up in a rush, that I'm actually happier to be at work than I am to be at lunch. What a disappointment. After returning to work for his afternoon to finish his daily shift, he packed up and cleaned up his desk, making sure that everything was in its place, all of the appropriate files being filed in their appropriate pigeonholes. He made his way once again back down to the street, and then, making his way home, he decided to skip taking the bus from the underground station, as the walk from the train station to his house wasn't that long, and the weather was pleasant. And in his mind he thought, why not save the pittance of the fare? And as he walked along, his mobile phone rang, demanding attention, which startled him, because no one ever called his mobile phone. He was one of the few people who kept a landline in his house, and that was his preferred method of speaking to people on the telephone. All of his friends knew to call him at that number if they had actually any desire to speak to him. And if he wasn't home, it was the most reliable way to leave a message for him if they were desirous of any kind of return call. But on this occasion, the mobile phone did ring, And he did answer, and it was another robot call, this time informing him that he had won a prize and that he should go to a particular address at a particular time and date in order to receive the prize that he had won. Apparently there were several prizes, and he wouldn't know which one he had actually won until he had got to the location. The only one that he remembered was the most valuable one, in his mind anyway, that was for $10,000 cash. This, he thought, would be quite a nice windfall, as he often found himself a little tight in money. Not that he didn't make enough. He had a pretty generous salary. It's just that he was often absent-minded, forgetting what he had and what he ought to be spending, and would frequently overspend to the point of nearing overdraft. He made a mental note of the time and date and address. And upon returning home, he made his way to the fridge in his kitchen, as there was a calendar that was stuck to the outside of the freezer door with a magnet. He reached up to the coffee cup on the top of the fridge with a broken handle, which is where he kept a pencil, a crayon, and a ballpoint pen. He chose the ballpoint pen to write the address and time down on the appropriate date, as to not forget this appointment in order to get the $10,000. He opened up the fridge and took out a beer, opening it up, taking a swig from the bottle, and then sighing with that, that was good. He settled himself down onto the table, reached across the table, grabbing an ashtray and a pack of cigarettes next to the ashtray and a pack of matches, taking out a cigarette and lighting it with the match, puffing on it, and exhaling out the smoke. Watching as the smoke dissipated into the room, he often enjoyed the shape and movement of the smoke as he watched it in the room, as it seemed somehow graceful and ephemeral to him in a way that seemed unearthly. He only smoked in the evening when he was drinking. Never in the morning, never at lunch, never at breaks at work. Only in the evenings at home when he was drinking. Whether he was alone or in the company of friends. And he always drank the same things. At home, it was either beer, usually an imported ale. He would permit himself some variety in this selection. Or gin and tonic with a twist of lime. Always Tanqueray. Always Canada Dry. When he was out, he would not smoke, but he would occasionally drink. Only with a meal, never socially. And the cocktail before the meal was always a Manhattan. He had never learned to make a Manhattan, so he never drank them at home. But he liked having things in a particular place. Somehow it helped him conceptually keep order in the world, a world that he often felt was far too chaotic. Not the natural sort of chaos that one can witness in the universe on its own, but the particular chaos created by humans and their intentional or otherwise harassments of each other. As he enjoyed the cigarette and the beer, he began to relax, feel a little more at home, even in his own home. He was fidgeting around and feeling a little antsy, maybe even giddy at the idea that perhaps he was the one that had won the $10,000. He walked over to the window and peering outside. He looked across the street, watching a man walking his dog. He often thought to himself that he would like to have a dog, not a cat, not like that annoying one that pestered him, but a dog. All the dogs that he had met in his life, for he had never kept them, and nor did his parents when he was a child, but he knew people that kept dogs, as most of us do, and he always enjoyed the company of dogs and liked playing with them. It was especially enjoyable if he was outside with one of his friends who kept dogs and at the park or maybe their backyard and throwing a ball for the dog to chase or just sort of roughhousing with it on a lawn. He often wondered to himself, and this night was no different, why don't I just get a dog? I'm a grown man. If I want a dog, I could get a dog. I certainly could afford to have a dog. So why don't I get a dog? And he would sit and wait for an answer, as if he half expected someone to actually answer. He decided to go out and look around, just go for a walk and look around. He often did this, walking for a long bit of time, a good stretch of the legs, he would think. The phrase came to his mind as it was one that was spoken by the character that Maureen O'Hara played in the film The Quiet Man with John Wayne. It's just a good stretch of the legs, she said. On this occasion, he was strolling around and found himself in an unfamiliar neighborhood. Not that he was lost. He knew where he was and where he could turn to get back to familiar streets. But the particular streets he was strolling down this evening were new to him, at least according to his own memory and experience, or the memory of his experiences. And as he was strolling down the street, he got to about the middle of a block, and he had noticed a man sort of crouching, seeming to be hiding from someone else's attention. He seemed to be peering into someone's window and watching a man. He could see some odd, glaring, flashing lights coming from inside of the dwelling that the man was sort of spying on. At least that is what it looked like to Bill. He paused for a moment, actually probably a little bit longer than a moment, and watched the man doing the staring. He was watching a man watching another man. And he realized that he'd been standing there for quite a while, or what seemed like it to him. uneasy feeling and decided that this was none of his business, and perhaps it was best if